All right, good morning. My name is Chuck Hogg, and I'm the immediate past chairman of the WISPA Board of Directors. In February of 2014, during my first term as WISPA's president, the WISPA Board laid forward a path for the association to change. Last year, the WISPA Board agreed to execute that last piece of that plan and decided that we needed to bring in professional leadership to our organization. The demands on the volunteer board, particularly those that oversaw our Washington efforts, were simply too overwhelming and the stakes were too high for us to manage on a part-time basis. Notwithstanding the dedicated, hard-working, and savvy team of professionals that we have. So we put together a search team, engaged a professional search firm, and conducted several interviews with an impressive group of candidates. And in the end, one person stood head and shoulders above the rest, and that was Claude Aiken. In the 6 months since Claude has been on the job, he has impressed us with his intelligence, his perseverance, connections, dedication, and work ethic. He's testified before Congress and visited members across the country, made the rounds with the media, and tapped into his vast network to up our game. In describing Claude, one of his former bosses at the FCC said, "When things are not going well, he keeps moving forward." And that's high praise and personifies what a leader should be. And in just 6 months, Claude is proving that he can, with the help of the support of everyone in this room, lead us to the next level and beyond. I encourage you to meet Claude at the conference. You will find him a terrific and engaging person. And I'm happy to be one of the ones who no longer has to stand before you and give that annual State of WISPA address. Instead, I'm pleased and privileged to publicly pass the torch to WISPA's president, Claude Aiken.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chuck, for that exceedingly kind introduction. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to Las Vegas and to WISPAPALOOZA 2018. Thanks for coming. I'm excited to be here for my very first WISPAPALOOZA experience, and we're excited to have you here as well. While I've met many of you already, I'm really excited to sit down with you as a group and individually to share and to hear more about our dynamic industry. Indeed, this week really is all about coming together, strengthening existing relationships, making new friends, reinvesting, and seeing the latest trends and innovations in fixed wireless. So since I'm the new guy, I thought I would share a little bit about myself. I grew up as a missionary kid in Istanbul, Turkey. Spent the first 15 years of my life there. I went to college in Grove City, Pennsylvania, law school in New York City, and spent pretty much the past decade of my career working at the FCC in various staff and leadership capacities, where I became steeped in communications policy and learned so much more about the critical need for rural broadband. So it was a natural step for me to come aboard at WISPA, where I can help give a voice to our community that is on the front lines of closing that digital divide. And you've succeeded at closing that divide, in part due to the incredible community that's here and the willingness to help each other out. You've done it with a spirit of volunteerism and community service, and with the grit and determination to go serve customers that nobody else would. I want to help you do more of that. I want to help make your businesses better and your lives easier. We'll have our challenges in getting there. I'm just one guy working for WISPA in DC. Just like many of you started out as one guy in an underserved community in rural America, frustrated that the big guys weren't providing you service. We'll have challenges, and I'm not daunted. Just like you, WISPA is small but mighty. We aim high, and we punch above our weight. So what do I want to do, working with and for you? I want to make sure that we're effective in Washington, D.C., and around the nation, advocating for your interests. I want to provide robust year-round educational opportunities and member benefits. And I want to get out and see what you're doing in person. Bring others to see what you are accomplishing and to tell your stories through WISPA. And of course, I want to make sure that we continue to have fantastic trade shows like WISPAPalooza. That's my vision for WISPA, and I invite you to join me in making that vision a reality. So what do we need to do to make our vision happen? Put simply, I need you. If you're not already a member, I need you to join WISPA, even if for no other reason than it is easier to keep you informed about the challenges coming down the road. We're stronger together, and I need your help. Second, I need you to let me know what you need to succeed, whether it's your spectrum needs, policy, education, whatever it is. I'm only as good as the input that I get from you. Lend us your skills and experience and volunteer on a WISPA committee. Third, I really need your help when we call you to take action and speak up on your company's behalf. We are up against significantly better funded interests in Washington. But your voices and your stories are powerful. Use them. You only help yourselves and your fellow WISPs when you rise to the call, and we're going to be calling on you to take action this morning and throughout the week. You can and you are making a difference. Folks like Cambium, who continue to support our legislative efforts financially. Folks like Scott and Mark LePere, who've sacrificed their time to advocate, to host policymakers, and to help them understand the WISP business. And there are many more of you who have stepped up who I just don't have the time to mention this morning. But remember this, you have made an impression. One of those people who's taken a notice of our sector in a big way is FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. I recently sat down with him a few days ago and posed a few questions and heard what he has to say about the federal policy issues facing WISPs, and I'd like to share that with you this morning. So please turn your attention to the screens for a short video.
Well, Chairman Pai, welcome to WISPAPalooza 2018. Even if it's not in real time, we just thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to chat with us and to talk to our members about what the job that you're doing here at the FCC. You know, you've made the digital divide your #1 priority, and you know, it's great from our perspective because you know, fixed wireless has been a big winner in the recent CAF Phase 2 reverse auction. So can you take a moment just to tell me, just from your perspective, how things worked out in that auction?
Would be happy to do so. First and foremost, though, Claude, thanks so much for coming, being here at the FCC. Thanks to all your members for what they do, and appreciate your leadership of this agency, or of this association at such a critical time. The Connect America Fund auction was a resounding success from our perspective. One of the visions that we had early on when we were structuring the auction is that we needed to broaden participation. I mean, not just put up to $2 billion out there for fixed broadband, but also make sure we had a wide variety of participants. And I had a feeling that WISP would step up. They're not a soft-spoken bunch, as I'm sure you know.
They are not.
And one of the great things is, and I see this over my travels, there's always a WISP willing to do the job. And so when we saw the results of the auction, I was thrilled. I mean, to have WISPs get over 9 figures of funding from the FCC to build out some of these high-speed, high-quality connections at speeds that I think are going to be very much appreciated by those consumers who are connected for the first time. That's going to be tremendous. And so I'm really looking forward to what WISPs bring to the table as these funds are distributed and as these networks are being built.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's you do have a lot of fans at WISPA because, you know, as you noted, we too share the goal of and you know, you have done a lot to that end so far in your tenure as chairman of the SEC, whether it's you know, shredding onerous regulations or streamlining infrastructure approaches. You know, we're very appreciative of the work that you've done. You know, can you take a minute and tell us the next big thing or a couple big things that you see coming down the pike from your perspective?
Well, sure. I think one of the things is modernizing our infrastructure rules to make sure that WISPs, that all ISPs, but WISPs in particular, have the ability to get some of the guts of these networks out into the field. Often, it's very hard to build a business case for deployment, and the more onerous the regulatory burden is with respect to infrastructure, the less likely it is that WISPs are going to be able to raise the capital and hire the crews to do this work. And so we're trying to update our rules on the infrastructure side. Spectrum too, get more spectrum into the commercial marketplace to allow WISPs to be able to provide some of this high-speed connectivity. Low, mid, and high band spectrum is, of course, what we're looking at, and a number of different bands, of course, that folks have been talking about. And the other one overall is to try to rethink how it is that we regulate some of these broadband providers. I think a lot of the conversation in Washington is focused on a few big names that everyone in the country knows. Sure. But to me, the beating heart of internet access in the United States is companies like Ethoplex, which I had a chance to meet in Wisconsin. Yep. Companies like Wave Wireless, which I had a chance to meet with in my hometown of Parsons, Kansas. And even the smaller providers that we didn't even announce we were coming. I was in Baker City, Oregon, and literally popped into GeoNet. And I think...
oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was great. The guy at the front desk was wondering, I think, perhaps at first, you know, what have you done wrong? And I said, no, we're just... happened to be walking here for lunch on the way to Hermiston. We just wanted to see what it is you guys do, and just to hear from them about how difficult it is to deploy in parts of rural Oregon, especially when the winter is hitting hard. It's just, it's an inspiration to me. And so those are the folks that we try to have in mind when we make our decisions here. We want to make sure that we don't treat the internet, for example, like a slow-moving utility, that we don't treat the GeoNets or the Ethoplexes or the Wave Wirelesses as anti-competitive monopolists. Just give them the freedom to innovate, the freedom to create jobs, the freedom to link these communities.
Absolutely.
And if we make the right decisions here in DC, I'm confident your members will take it from there.
Well, we're ready to go. So, you know, I know that you are a huge fan of pop culture references in your statements, and an even bigger fan of The Big Lebowski. So you'll understand this analogy when I say that for us, spectrum policy is like the dude's rug. It ties everything together. So you know, so going back to spectrum policy, how do you see you know, the FCC's current approach to spectrum policy as kind of tying everything together for rural broadband?
First and foremost, I mean, I have to applaud you for the pandering reference. I mean, there's no greater movie, I think, in the American oeuvre than The Big Lebowski.
There really isn't.
Oh, it's just spectacular. Although my wife doesn't seem to appreciate its genius as much as I do.
Either.
Yeah, an acquired taste, I guess. But with respect to spectrum, we really believe that this is the lifeblood of the internet in the future. As the world goes wireless, I think increasingly it's going to be important to get as much spectrum into the marketplace as we can. And as part of our 5G strategy, we didn't want to focus on just one band or even one low-range spectrum. We wanted low, mid, and high-band spectrum to get out there. And we also wanted it to be as flexible as possible. I think one of the great lessons of spectrum policy over the last generation is that the time when FCC officials could sit here in Washington and micromanage how every little bit of spectrum should be used, that time is gone. That flexible use is the best way to promote consumer welfare. At the end of the day, we think that WISPs are better able to figure out how to stitch together holdings and use these airwaves in a way that's going to benefit their customers. And the proof is in the pudding. It's I think your members have done a great job with some of this flexible use policy, and our goal is to make sure that you're able to do more of that in the future.
Well, that's great to hear. So, a critical part of that rug, the dude's rug for us, is CBRS spectrum.
Yeah.
You knew I was going to ask you about
Yeah, absolutely.
So what can you tell us about how our members are going to be impacted by the FCC's decision on CBRS?
Sure, and I understand that this is an issue where a lot of people were divided, and some of your members in particular might not be happy where Commissioner O'Reilly's plan has come down. Our hope is nonetheless, though, that some of the cuts we have made will give WISPs an ability to use the spectrum in a way that ultimately will help them serve their customers. Understanding the geographic license sizes might not be to the particular liking of some members, we hope that this is something that enables them to have some certainty. And if you are looking to provide internet access in a rural county, to be able to use it in a way that is much more predictable than it was in the past. And the renewal expectancy as well is something that's especially critical. To know that you're going to have the ability to use the spectrum into the future and to extend the license terms as well. Our hope is that that gives WISP some certainty too. But understanding that folks are on different sides of the ledger on this issue, we had to make a difficult call. And I know Commissioner O'Reilly spent a lot of time with some members talking about this.
Yeah.
But on this and other spectrum bands, we are hopeful that ultimately we can reach compromises that devote this spectrum to its highest valued use. And I'm confident that in many, many communities, from Wisconsin to Washington State, that WISPs are going to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, this will be it'll be a tough pill to swallow for our members, and it kind of goes into my next question, which we're concerned about balance a lot of times in spectrum policy. And from our members' perspective, we're concerned that when we're talking about a rush to 5G, that we don't lose sight of innovative use cases for 5G, including rural broadband. Especially those rural areas that have no G today.
Right.
So, how going forward do we strike that right balance on spectrum policy? I know you've addressed it a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more of your thoughts.
Sure. I mean, for me at least, making sure that unlicensed is an important part of the conversation. That is critical. So, for example, we're going to be voting on a 6 gigahertz inquiry shortly. To me, it was important to make sure that we had unlicensed opportunities there. In addition, we've looked at spectrum in the 5G range, the high band ranges, part of which will be unlicensed as well, and even some of the more innovative spectrum. We teed up a notice of inquiry on 95 gigahertz spectrum and above. It was important to me to make sure that unlicensed had a place there. I'm not an engineer, so I can't pretend to say that the propagation characteristics are such that WISP will be able to make use of it. But if we set the stage for innovation, who knows? There are some really smart engineers and technologists who might be able to find a use case for WISPs to be able to use the spectrum without having to come to the FCC, pay for a license, abide by those regulatory requirements and the like. And so our hope is on the unlicensed side that we can make some progress. On the licensed side too, though, we want to make sure we encourage much more competition. Just as with CAF, we opened up CAF to competition from WISPs because we didn't want to simply go do the same thing, cutting checks to the incumbent operators and excluding some of the companies like WISP that have been doing a great job without these subsidies. The same thing with licensed spectrum too. We want everyone to have a chance to compete for the spectrum. Understanding that there might be some difficult policy cuts in the details, but nonetheless that we want to encourage more folks to walk in that door and put in their bids.
Sure. Well, turning to a positive note on spectrum, we're very appreciative that you included in your C-band proposal or our asks for that would enable gigabit fixed wireless in rural areas. But that's a rulemaking that's going to be pretty thorny. A lot of issues to resolve. So I guess just from your perspective, what are the critical issues in your mind that we need to get a handle on in order to be able to make that a reality?
Yeah, there are a lot of steps. As the dude might say, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. But we were trying to think first and foremost, okay, how do we encourage some of the broadcasters to make sure they register? How do we have an accurate sense of where all these earth stations are? And then moving forward, how do we deal with some of the interests that are vying for this particular spectrum? And this is obviously a huge opportunity, 500 megahertz of spectrum in the C-band. We want to make sure it reaches its highest valued use and trying to manage some of those competing interests is not going to be easy to do, as I found out. In all of these spectrum bands, you might have federal users, you might have incumbent private interests from across different industries, which is the case here in the C-band. And you're trying to strike that balance in a way that works for everybody is not going to be easy to do. But that's why they pay us the big bucks in government, of course, is to make difficult policy choices like this.
Well, thank you for those thoughts. So, before we go, let me just kind of end on a personal note with a personal question. You're known as a very, jovial, personable guy, and but it can be tough to keep your sense of humor and to keep on top of things when there's so much when it's from criticism to threats and things of that nature. How do you keep your cool in the face of all of this? You've been doing this for a while, and how do you just not end up a perpetual ball of stress?
That's a great question. Part of it involves just having my family around and close. It's no matter how difficult the day is in the office or when I'm on the road, you come back and my son and daughter just give me a hug and a kiss, and that kind of grounds you a little bit. Part of it is also just relying on friends, including, I've now talked to virtually every living chairman of the FCC in the past, going all the way back to Newt Minow, who was JFK's first FCC chair from 61 to 63. And to be able to call on them and understand that even though I'm in a much more exposed position than ever before, even though there are things like social media, which didn't exist back then, nonetheless, they understand the stress of the job and they're able to provide counsel, which has been really helpful. Part of it is also just, honestly, being able to work with people like you, who, even though you might approach an issue from a different perspective, nonetheless, you approach it in a collegial way and you come with a smile, not with a pitchfork, and that's always favorable. But I will say it's been an interesting slog over the last 20 months. I knew it had changed quite a bit when I was down in Mobile, Alabama, done some great events during the day, and went to this craft brewery to sample one of the local brews. And I go to the bathroom, washing my hands, and the guy next to me in the sink looks over, and he gives me that look, and I don't know how to describe it, you just know that look. He says, "Are you Ajit Pai?" I thought, even in the bathroom of a craft brewery in Mobile, Alabama. And so I was just glad he didn't ask for a selfie in the bathroom. That was the one thing I was grateful for. But
that's good.
It's just sort of weird that getting recognized in some of these places, it's not necessarily negative, it's just different.
You're a national figure now.
For better or worse. And the only regret I have in that regard is that people bring the mug into it. I'm like, look, the mug was an innocent bystander. It had nothing to do with all these decisions. So don't take it out of the mug. It's sort of goes with the territory, I guess. But in all seriousness, no. The other thing that keeps me going is little notes of support I get and words of support I get from folks like your members to go to Baker City and to hear how our decisions are making a positive difference, to hear from Galen Manners or from the folks at Ethiplex. I mean, those are the things that remind me that at the end of the day, whatever is on, whatever the headline is in the paper or whatever is on the internet, that's more ephemeral. What really matters is setting rules that allow WISPs to connect people with digital opportunity. And if my tenure at the end of this time allows them to do more of that, I'll count it a successful tenure, regardless of what the headlines might say.
Well, that's very good to hear, and we really appreciate your leadership on so many issues that are critical to the fixed wireless industry. Well, Chairman Pai, thank you so much for spending the time. It's been great to have this chat, and we'll have to have you out again at one of our shows sometime soon.
Thanks, I would love to do that.
So let's give a round of applause for Chairman Pai. He gets us, and he's been there a lot for us. He knows the vital role that you all play in your communities, and when the chairman of the FCC says you're doing a great job at rural broadband, particularly a guy whose parents grew up with service by a WISP, it's quite a compliment. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what to expect at the show. We've covered a little bit of this already, but for your sakes, we'll do it again. As you might have seen earlier, this WISPA Palooza is our largest yet, and it's a really great place for you to learn and to grow. All of our sessions are taught by top professionals who practice what they preach, and we'll be talking about things like how to plan and launch a WISP, how to take your WISP to the next level. We'll have dozens of sessions in 6 tracks devoted to regulation, business, finance, HR, marketing, all the good things. And of course, the many technical sessions and trainings. And on Fiber Friday, we will spend an entire day on the details of building a hybrid fiber fixed wireless network. We'll also be providing several briefings on our government policy efforts in DC, our advocacy to advance our collective interests, and how you can pitch in and help us make a difference in those efforts. We'll also hear from some senior FCC staff about what to expect in the coming year. You'll hear it often this week, but we really do have a lot of issues at stake in DC, from spectrum to subsidies, infrastructure, and beyond. We have a great team working on these issues for you, and that team needs to include you. So let me turn to an overview of the progress WISPA has made in 2018 and what to expect in 2019. But first, let me just kind of update you a little bit about what's going on in our industry, and that's a great slide. The Carmel Group recently updated me on their latest industry findings, and I'm really impressed with what everyone in this room has been up to. Recent additional research shows that fixed wireless revenues, be it gross revenues, net revenues, or the all-important average revenue per user, ARPU, have increased at an even greater clip than first estimated. Subscriber growth has also accelerated. User growth in the next 5 years was projected to be 8 million by 2020, and now it's moving closer to 11 million total subscribers by 2023. Our industry's projected 5% ARPU growth in 2019 is now closer to 6.5%. And the original estimates of a 5.2 billion total industry revenues by year-end 2021 has now been adjusted upward to 6 billion. And overall subscriber growth for 2018 increases to 9%. And subscriber acquisition cost continues to remain the lowest in the industry, lower than satellite, fiber, cable, or telco, and return on investment continues to exceed the 4 major competitor technologies that we have, and churn remains the lowest in our industry as well. So it makes sense that we're seeing so many accolades for this industry. 6 of you found places on the Inc. 5,000 list of America's fastest growing companies. I'd encourage more of you to apply next year and increase that number even further. And then, we've mentioned this a little bit already, but a dozen of you were winners in the FCC's Connect America Fund Phase 2 reverse auction. And that's going to be a $700 million plus injection of capital into our industry and into our local communities over the course of the next 10 years. Our friend Mike Dano is here. He's the editor-in-chief of Fierce Wireless. And I'm proud to report that Fierce Wireless named Rise Broadband as their service provider of the year last year. And they've named yours truly as a rising star in the wireless industry this past year. So, thank you. Thank you. So, Mike, wherever you are, thank you for that recognition and the great respect that you have shown our industry. Now, we've covered this a little bit already, but who is WISPA? WISPA it's all of us, but we're fortunate to have a huge team of volunteers who contribute so much to our collective success. Over the summer, our members elected 3 board members, and you see all of their wonderful pictures up there on the slide. We have Nathan Stuke as chairman, Brian Young, vice chairman, Garth Nicholas as our treasurer, and then as directors we have Dennis Burgess, Blair Davis, Jeff Kohler, Mark Radabaugh, Mike Whalen, and rounding out the group we have Todd Harpist, who is our secretary this year, not a member of the board, but his service is very much appreciated. And we transitioned to a new organizational structure with a full-time president of the organization. That would be me. So please join me in a round of applause to thank our board members and officers for their service to WISPA. So now here is our a roster of committee chairs who, along with their respective committee members, devote significant amounts of volunteer time and energy to the task of serving all of us. Nathan Stuke and Trina Coffey co-chair our agenda committee, which develops the agenda for our major trade shows. Garth Nicholas chairs our budget committee. And then on the advocacy front, Mark Radabaugh leads our policy committee. And that's our new committee that is focused on determining and guiding the positions that WISPA takes, whether it's before an administrative agency or Congress. Jimmy Carr leads our Government Affairs Committee, and that's the new committee that's focused on the implementation of the things that the Policy Committee comes up with. Todd Harpist heads up our Nominations Committee and our State Coordinators Committee. Chuck Hogg is leading a new Best Practices Committee, which is designed to help develop a formal compendium of knowledge so that startup WISPs have access to the learnings of the many who have gone before. And Tim Malone is heading up our new Education Committee, which will work to develop new learning opportunities for everybody outside of our major trade shows. So please join me in a round of applause again to thank all these people for their efforts. So now to give you a snapshot of the professional team that supports everything WISPA. These are the members of our staff. Trina Coffey, our VP of Events and Operations. Ariel Coffey is our Meetings and Member Relations Associate. Gary Helmers, our Sales and Membership Coordinator. Will Peterson's our Marketing Associate, and Richard Bernhardt's our National Spectrum Advisor. A lot of them can't be here in this room, so please stop by and thank them. A lot of them are just spending their day at the Reg desk, so please reach out to them and thank them for their service to WISPA. I can tell you that these folks work extremely hard on your behalf, with many long days, late nights, and more than a few weekends, particularly when we're leading up to a show. So let's give them a big round of applause as well. We also have some long-term veterans of the industry who serve as volunteers in other ways to help WISPA and the industry further its goals. We have Elizabeth Bowles, who serves as the chair of the FCC's Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee. Matt Larson serves on the Broadband Infrastructure Technology Advisory Group, which is quite a mouthful, I think it's known as BTAG. And we have Mark Radabaugh, who serves on another BDAC working group as well. So join me again in thanking them for their support of our industry. And we'll keep it going with the applause lines, because finally, as we rely on our full-time professional staff and active volunteers, we rely on a small but mighty team of professional advisors as well. Steve Coran of the law firm Lerman Center provides extensive assistance to our policy committee in its regulatory advocacy work. Fred Goldstein of Inter Isle Consulting is our technical consultant. Ari Storch of the Madison Group is our government relations consultant. And rounding it out, Dale Curtis of Dale Curtis Communications provides PR and media support. So again, join me. Thank you, these folks. So what are all these folks aligning to achieve? What are our goals for the coming year? Well, it kind of sounds like what I've already said. We're trying to continue to strengthen the industry's presence and effectiveness in Washington, D.C. We're continuing to expand member communication and education through newsletters, webinars, and beyond. And we're focused on bringing online some new member benefits as well. On the last item, we've heard from many of you that we need to help our smaller members who can't always afford the benefits packages that bigger companies can. And to that end, we're seriously considering an association health plan to be offered through WISPA. We're in the information gathering phase right now, so we hope to share some more information on that soon. On the second item, member communications, we have several email groups that are pretty easy to join on the website under the resources tab. We also have a bi-weekly newsletter, the WISPA report, which you can sign up on the website under the News tab. We also have an active presence on social media, so I would encourage you to follow us there, to engage with us on whatever your favorite online platform is. We're also planning, and we have been offering webinars on important topics throughout the year, and those are generally recorded and provided on our website to members as well. So if you're not familiar with the WISPA website, we've made some upgrades over the past year. There's a lot of information hosted there, and there's also many resources and tools. So if you have any questions about WISPA at any time, you can reach out to me, but a lot of the good information that we have is also hosted on our website. So if we're doing our jobs right, the answer should probably be there. So coming back to that first bullet on the list of goals, I've said it before, I'll say it again, a significant part of what we do at WISPA is policy advocacy, mostly at the federal level, but we also want to try to ramp up some of our state level work too. Over the past few years, WISPA has made tremendous strides in our advocacy efforts. Our name and our sector is better known. Our story is being told. Our views are being sought out, and in short, we're having an impact, and we're on a trajectory that you should be proud of. I'm impressed by the amount of time and effort that our board members and committee chairs devote to our industry. A lot of that day-to-day workload has been transferred to me, but we still need you to help us understand and to advocate on policy issues. We always seek your input, and we always take your views into account. So what have we accomplished in the last 6 months since WISPA met in Birmingham and since I came on board? For starters, we've had our proposals featured at the FCC. All of the groundwork that we have done on the 3.7 gigahertz band has resulted in the FCC formally seeking comment on fixed wireless operations in the upper portion of the band. That proceeding will play out over the next year and is a big opportunity for all of us. The FCC also adopted many of our proposals in the Connect America Fund auction, resulting in our industry winning about half of the funding. We continue to work with federal agencies on reducing unnecessary regulatory obligations and improving broadband mapping, and we're regularly consulted on legislation, both by members of Congress and by other parties who are interested in our views and our support. Recently, we received our first invitation in a while to testify in Congress on rural broadband issues. We were invited to participate in the recent 5G policy summit held at the White House. And we were being invited to participate on issues important to our industry from the Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, and beyond. Throughout this time, we've met with dozens of senators, congressmen, senior appointed officials across the government to tell them about fixed wireless and what it can do for rural broadband and what we need from them to be able to continue doing what we are doing. In the public sphere, we've more than doubled the number of mentions of WISPs or WISPA in the press, and we'll be quoted in more and more prominent media outlets. So now let's talk about an area where we honestly haven't been as successful, but we are still fighting. I'm talking, of course, about CBRS. On CBRS, we waged our biggest advocacy effort ever, going back to 2013 and then really stepping it up in the last year. We've submitted many rounds of formal comments. We've had some of the world's top experts on 5G and spectrum auctions back up our positions. We've held face-to-face meetings with every commissioner and their staffs. We've answered every question. And we've even hosted commissioners at a few of your facilities. 182 of you signed a letter to the FCC. We've placed opinion pieces in the press and earned dozens of mentions in sympathetic news clips. And we've joined forces on a smart, balanced compromise proposal with every other rural group, 8 industry associations, 11 leading companies, and the nation's largest port authority. Now, believe me, I'm as frustrated as you that contrary interests are still trying to push us out of the CBRS band. That fight is coming to a head, and the FCC is planning to vote on a new CBRS policy 2 weeks from today. And I want to assure you that our entire team will be working right up until that vote on several fronts to have an impact. This is critically important to our future. And if you want to learn more about the issue, I'd invite you to come to the CBRS session that we're holding here on Thursday at 9:15 a.m. But at this time, I'd also like to shift gears and introduce another senior government official who knows WISPA already and wants to know us better. In addition to sitting down with Chairman Pai, I also sat down recently with David Redl, who is the administrator of the NTIA, an agency within the Department of Commerce, who also plays a huge role in broadband policy. Here is a short video of our conversation. Good afternoon. I am Claude Aiken, President and CEO of WISPA, and I am here today with Assistant Secretary Redl from the NTIA. We've known each other for quite a while, and you've been in this job for a while now, and it's good to be here with you. We're sad you couldn't come out to make it in Vegas with us, but we're excited to be able to do this and show this to all of our members who are there. So, you know, you've been pretty loud about your commitment to rural broadband. You've been a great Spectrum guy. Our guys really need Spectrum, but you know, I wanted to give you an opportunity in your own words to tell our members about what NTIA does in your own words.
Well, thanks, Claude. It's great to be here. I'm sorry that this is how I have to do this and that I couldn't be with you all in Nevada, but I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you about NTIA and what we're doing to help promote rural broadband, particularly in our work through Spectrum. WISPA's members are a critical part of the wireless ecosystem. You are helping us solve not only our problems in using Spectrum more efficiently, but also in bringing rural broadband to those who desperately need connectivity. Here at NTIA, we're currently focused on making sure we look holistically at the low, the mid, and the high band spectrum and figure out ways to produce more for commercial use for both licensed and unlicensed uses. I'd like to take a minute, if I could, to highlight in particular the work that our Institute for Telecommunication Sciences in Boulder, Colorado is doing with the 3.5 gigahertz band. The CBRS spectrum, as many of you know, holds a lot of promise for both unlicensed and licensed use to bring more broadband to more Americans. Critical to the use of that band is the ability of federal and non-federal users to share. Our ITS engineers are hard at work in Boulder right now trying to certify the systems that will make that sharing possible. Those two systems are the Spectrum Access System and the Environmental Sensing Capability. These critical systems will effectively take what had once been a static exclusion zone that prevented any use of these spectrum bands near military installations, and instead dynamically protect them when they need to be protected. The environmental sensing capability will let us take those zones down to 0 when the Navy doesn't need access for radar systems, and will allow us to have WISPA and its members and other citizens around the country use that spectrum in beneficial ways where it's available. We're really excited about this, and I hope you are too. And Claude, I know you share my excitement about 3.5 coming to market.
Absolutely. It's a huge piece of spectrum for our members, especially since a lot of them are already deployed in the upper portion of the band. So you talked a little bit about what's coming down the pike with CBRS. How about further on into the future? What do you see when you look into your crystal ball? I know you've worked on spectrum policy a lot longer than I have. What do you see coming down the pike from your perspective on spectrum policy?
Well, I think we're at an inflection point in spectrum policy. We're going to continue at NTIA to try to meet the dual mandate that Congress has given us. NTIA as an agency is tasked with making sure that our federal spectrum users have the spectrum they need to perform their critical missions, whether it be weather, air traffic control, or training for our men and women in uniform. That spectrum is critical to our national security and to our economic security. That's only one half of what we do on spectrum policy, though. The other half is dictated by Congress, which is to look to find ways to make federal users more efficient and make more spectrum available for commercial services. Now, I've said this a couple times, and I'll say it again here. The era of easy clearing is over. We've run that playbook a lot, and it's been great for the U.S. economy. We are the world leader in 4G LTE. We are the world leader in providing broadband to our citizens, and WISPA's members are key to our national success. But we're going to have to do some more hard work to figure out how to make these two things work together. And that's why I'm really proud of the work that my team does every day to try and find ways to make systems work together more efficiently. The next thing I see coming down the pike is one we announced in December of last year, and that's looking at the 3.45 to 3.55 spectrum. It's immediately adjacent to the CBRS spectrum I mentioned earlier, and that 100 megahertz holds real promise for sharing between DoD radar systems and more of the kinds of systems that your members, Claude, have been deploying and using to bring broadband to rural parts of America. We're excited about that, and there's a lot of work left to be done on it.
All right, that sounds great. Because as you well know, spectrum continues to be incredibly important to all folks in the wireless ecosystem. So, I think a lot of our members tend to think about FCC, and they think about USDA when we're talking about rural broadband. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on rural broadband and what NTIA is doing in that regard? Sure.
So earlier this year, the White House the President asked Secretary Perdue at USDA to work on a rural prosperity task force. The report that came out of that identified broadband as a key driver of the economy in rural America. And NTIA plays a critical role in helping to knock down barriers to bring broadband to parts of the country that are unserved and underserved. I'd like to highlight a couple areas, if I could, that I think our work will be really helpful to WISPA members. First of all, we're looking at ways to streamline permitting within the federal government. NTIA co-chairs a working group that we lead with the Department of Agriculture that will look at ways across the entire government to streamline federal permitting. Everyone who has worked in this field has a story about getting all the way through the process with one agency only to find out that there was another agency that you needed to get a yes from. That's not an acceptable outcome for us anymore, and the President has made clear it's something that we should be trying to solve. Also, the federal government happens to be the largest landowner in the United States. We own thousands of buildings, thousands of towers and utility poles. We're doing work right now to say, okay, what can we do to bring those assets to bear on this challenge? When your members look to put up facilities, I would love for them to be able to say first, hey, is there a federal tower that's already in place that I can lease space on for my transmitters? We're trying to bring all those assets together right now, and it's a real challenge. As you all know, the U.S. government is a large and geographically dispersed entity, and bringing together these assets is challenging, but we're up to the task. The last piece is taking the different pieces of the federal government that fund broadband, and you mentioned RUS and the FCC, but there are others that work on other broadband loans, broadband grants, or other of the pieces of the infrastructure that make broadband possible. It will surprise no one who's ever worked in Washington or who's worked with Washington that sometimes the left hand and the right hand don't always talk to one another. And so what we're doing now is trying to make sure we can bring all those people to the table and say, how can we make sure we're working together? A big piece of that for us is what we're doing at NTIA and the broadband map. So Congress last year asked us to work with the FCC to improve the national broadband map, but I know many rural Americans and many companies that serve rural America were frustrated with the FCC's most recent broadband map. They thought it overstated coverage in rural America to their detriment. I don't want to knock the FCC. They're doing a really good job with the data they've got, but I think everyone agrees at this point that their map only tells part of the story. NTIA is working diligently right now. We're going to be putting out requests for comments soon on where we can find additional data sets and to bring technology to the table on telling the rest of the story, on what rural broadband really looks like in America. And I hope that your members will be active participants, because in some of the hardest to reach areas, your members are serving, they are serving well, they're serving in areas where customers are choosing them over other alternatives. We think that's a story that needs to be told.
Absolutely. Well, and I know our members will really appreciate those kind words from you. So, we've talked a lot about policy so far. Let's just talk a little bit about you. There's always a person behind the position, and so just tell us a little bit about yourself and how happy you were earlier this month when Penn State trounced Pitt in the great annual rivalry game.
Well, that's sadly, the Keystone Classic, as they've now been calling it, will be coming to an end soon. But as a family where my in-laws are both Pitt Panthers, my wife and I are both Nittany Lions. That was
family divided.
It was a good game this year for us. We were very happy with the outcome. I wish it would always turn out that way. And It's going to be a tough season for our Nittany Lions. But a little bit about me. I started my career working in the competitive wireless industry. I spent 6 years as a regulatory lawyer before turning my attention to policy making instead of trying to influence policymakers. I spent 7 years on Capitol Hill working for Chairman Fred Upton and Chairman Greg Walden on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And I couldn't be prouder of the work that I was able to do through my bosses while I was there on promoting broadband deployment, bringing spectrum, both licensed and unlicensed, to market, and streamlining facilities siting. I think those are some of the biggest achievements that we've had in communications policy in the last 6-7 years, and I'm proud to have played a small part in them.
Sounds great. Well, like a lot of potential political appointees, you were unfortunately held up for a while in confirmation limbo, so they say. And I'm just kind of curious, just from a personal standpoint, what was sort of the funniest, well-meaning thing that somebody said to you during that period when you had gone through the entire process and were just waiting for the doors to NTIA to open to you?
Well, I do want to start by saying that as all political appointees who've gone through this process, I am incredibly thankful to Secretary Ross and President Trump for sticking with me through the whole process. It's long and arduous, and it's part of our system, but it's not fun. The most well-meaning thing someone said to me, it actually probably wasn't something someone said to me, but rather to my wife. A friend of ours said, "It must be so nice having David at home. He must be getting so much work done," to which she said, "Now there's an idea." And so my honey-do list got exponentially longer shortly thereafter. But I think she lived to regret that because it involved me buying a lot of tools and building things in our house. So I think ultimately she regretted the decision.
As someone who is probably about to undergo some home renovations, I look forward to that as well. So, David, thank you so much for spending the time to talk to me and talk to our members about Spectrum, about rural broadband, and about what you're doing here at NTIA. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and good luck for a successful show.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So as you can see, WISPA is engaged at the highest levels in DC, but we still face some pretty significant challenges. The big guys outspend us on lobbying by hundreds of millions of dollars, and they outstaff us by the hundreds as well. While WISPA's professional team is doing all that we can, we cannot succeed without your help. Everyone in this room can play a part, and you should. When WISPA calls, we do need you to answer. And we're trying to make this easier. You may have seen an email from me recently with a call to action on our CBRS policy, with a new online advocacy tool that we've brought online. So I would like us right now to make a push on our next big issue, access to C-band spectrum. So please take out your phones. Take out your phones. All right, there we go. And text WISPA to 50457. You'll get a link on your phone to our new advocacy tool. All you'll need to do is add your name, contact details, customize the language if you'd like, click send, and your elected officials will hear from you. So please do that right now. If everyone in this room does that, or any time today, we'll make sure that your elected representatives will hear from you and from hundreds of your peers. Our goal is for about 500 of you to take action this week. So later in the show, I'll try to let you know how many folks actually did, or if you catch me in the halls, you can ask me how we're doing. And I hope you'll be a part of that number. This will be a new high watermark for WISPA advocacy, and we'll be using the same tool throughout the year to make it easy for your voice to be heard in the halls of government. Now, a couple housekeeping items before I go. There are a couple of great regulatory panels that will keep you up to date on the latest on spectrum and subsidies, and separately, we're lucky to be joined by Jay Schwartz, an advisor to FCC Chairman Pai. I also look forward to seeing everyone at our annual awards ceremony tonight at 7:30, where we'll be presenting awards to those in our industry who have gone above and beyond. And don't forget our great keynotes. Tomorrow at 11:45, we'll hear from some of our own members who have had experience preparing for and recovering from natural disasters. And then on Thursday at 11:45, we'll have the very entertaining Matt Havens, who will tell us how to stop acting our age and deal with all 4 generations in today's workforce. I'm looking forward to both of those. So let me leave you with one last thing that I've learned and that I love about this group already. WISPA is a family. We help each other out in hard times. We teach and we learn from each other. We may disagree on important issues sometimes, like every family does, but we always search for common ground. At the end of the day, we come together as a family. But being a member of WISPA isn't just about sending the occasional email to the members list or even your membership dues, though I will say those are very, very much appreciated. WISPA can serve you best if we hear from you regularly. And you can help yourself and your fellow WISPs when you volunteer and answer our calls to action. So just 10 minutes here and there can make an immeasurable difference in the future of your business and the business of your fellow WISPs. So participate in surveys. Respond to requests for information. Act when we call. Pick a committee of interest and get involved. I firmly believe that we are stronger when we work together. And with that, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the show, and it's a really great time to be WISP. Thank you very much.
I got to say, I know Chuck mentioned that he was very thankful that Claude was up and doing this type of a speech. And you guys know I have no problem being in front of you talking, but to do a speech like that, that was awesome, amazing. I'm so glad you did it instead of me. So let's give him another round of applause. Thank you very much. So I think WISPA is starting on a new path. I was not on the board when they were doing the search for a president, a full-time president. The day it was announced, I got this email and I'm like, who's Claude? What is this? And I happened to be in Washington, D.C. that day, so I emailed him and said, hey, I'm going to be in D.C. Do you want to meet? He's like, sure. So after he got his kids to sleep, we met and we talked, and I was amazed that the amount of knowledge he had of where we needed to go as an industry, the research. He's like, so I've been thinking, what about this and what about that? I'm like, have you been in our industry for the last 15 years? It's amazing. So I think the search committee and the board did an amazing job picking the right person to run our organization and take us to the next level. So now we have about a 15-minute break, and we'll do speed dating. So take your break, come back in here at 11 o'clock or shortly thereafter, and we'll have a little bit of fun with speed dating and get to know each other better. Thank you very much.